The air in the Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary, a sprawling expanse of meticulously maintained habitats and hushed viewing areas, hummed with the ceaseless, high-pitched thrum of advanced filtration systems and the low murmur of 1,000 animal sounds. Gleaming glass enclosures reflected the precise, clinical glow of overhead lights, illuminating creatures from across the globe. Yet, amidst this vibrant tableau of conservation efforts and technological marvel, Elias Thorne existed as a quiet, almost imperceptible presence. He was an old, quiet, and deeply dedicated zookeeper. His meticulous care for the animals, particularly the chimpanzee enclosure, often going unnoticed, dismissed by the younger, more technology-focused staff as merely eccentric. Elias was on the cusp of his mandatory retirement, a prospect that filled him with a quiet dread. The Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary wasn't just his workplace, it was his life, his sanctuary, the culmination of decades of dedicated service. His home, a small rustic cabin nestled discreetly on the sanctuary grounds, was filled not with personal mementos or modern gadgets, but with hand-drawn animal behavior charts, worn copies of primatology texts, and shelves lined with meticulously organized notes on individual animals. His greatest joy came not from human interaction, which often felt superficial, but from understanding the subtle, often unseen, language of the animals, their complex social structures, and the delicate balance of their wild instincts within a managed environment. His worn but sturdy work boots, perpetually scuffed with the dust of animal enclosures and the mud of distant trails, stood in stark contrast to the pristine uniforms and sleek, touch-screen devices of younger zookeepers who prioritized digital tracking over direct observation. Elias's hands, calloused and strong from countless hours of cleaning, feeding, and caring for powerful primates, bore the testament of decades spent nurturing life. His days were a blur of focused intensity. He'd eat solitary, simple meals, a plain sandwich, a thermos of strong tea, amidst piles of research papers on animal cognition, his gaze thoughtful, often fixed on a detailed behavior chart displayed on his tablet, even during brief breaks. He found his greatest joy not in social gatherings, which often felt loud and distracting, but in the intricate beauty of a chimpanzee's complex vocalizations, in the perfect logic of an elephant's migratory patterns, in the silent dance of unspoken animal communication. His quiet discipline was absolute. His feeding schedules were perfectly organized. Every animal's dietary needs meticulously recorded. His unwavering focus on individual animal well-being, on detecting the subtle signs of distress or illness invisible to automated sensors, his tendency to communicate more with animals through patient observation and empathetic understanding rather than human conversation, making him appear aloof, overly sentimental, even a bit strange to the unobservant. They saw a man of immense dedication, perhaps, but one lost in the ethereal realm of animal empathy, disconnected from the real world of zoo management. Yet, despite his unassuming presence and his sometimes perceived eccentricity, Elias possessed an inherent compassion, a quiet, unique understanding of animals that shone through his reserved nature. One blustery Tuesday afternoon, during a bustling public viewing session in the crowded primate house, a critical incident unfolded. A younger, visibly distressed child, a boy named Sammy, no older than 5, clutching a crucial, unauthorized food item, a brightly wrapped candy bar, accidentally dropped it into a sensitive primate enclosure, home to a group of agitated baboons. The sudden flash of color, the sweet scent of sugar, and the immediate agitation of the primates risked contamination, agitation, and potentially aggression, a serious threat to both the animals and the public. While others panicked, screaming warnings or shouting at the child, and the supervising zookeepers rushed to contain the agitated primates, Elias, who had been quietly observing the subtle social dynamics within the baboon troop from a discreet distance, immediately assessed the unfolding disaster. He saw the candy bar land, the immediate aggressive posturing of the alpha male, and the genuine terror in Sammy's eyes. Despite his reserved nature and the fact that intervening offered no direct benefit to him. Indeed, It could draw unwanted attention to his meticulous but slow analysis, or even violate the zoo's strict no public contact policy. Elias felt a familiar, visceral tug. This was about animal welfare, about public safety, a fundamental duty that transcended personal comfort or professional protocol. This showcased his inherent compassion and quiet, unique understanding of animals, without a word, without drawing any attention to himself beyond the necessary quick action. Elias calmly and efficiently moved. He didn't yell, didn't chastise. He simply approached the agitated enclosure, his movements fluid and precise. He quickly identified the specific primate's agitated behavior, its focus on the candy bar. He then, with quiet precision, and using a rarely seen, specially trained hand signal, a slow, deliberate sweep of his hand, followed by a specific, low-pitched vocalization, coaxed the agitated baboon away from the candy, allowing the younger staff to safely retrieve the item without incident or harm to the animal. The baboon, surprisingly, responded immediately to Elias's subtle command, its aggression visibly dissipating. The other zookeepers, bewildered but grateful, stared at Elias, then at the now calm baboon troop. Sammy, pale but now filled with overwhelming relief, stared at Elias, his eyes wide with a mixture of bewilderment and gratitude. "Mr. You talked to him, thank you," he stammered, his voice choked with emotion. Elias merely nodded, his expression unreadable. He offered a small, almost imperceptible smile of encouragement, and then quietly melted back into the periphery of the primate house, resuming his quiet observation of the animals, seeking no recognition, no praise. He had simply done what needed to be done, an instinct that defined his unique character, a quiet act of quick thinking that prioritized animal well-being and public safety over his own personal comfort or anonymity. Later that evening, as he returned to his small cabin, Elias sat at his worn wooden desk, meticulously reviewing complex primatology charts he had created over decades. He picked up an old, brittle zoological report detailing impossible animal communication or inexplicable animal anxieties from decades past. A subtle, almost imperceptible tremor ran through Elias's dominant hand when he sketched out a particularly intricate, counterintuitive pattern of chimpanzee vocalizations. Or when he reviewed old, obscure animal behavior reports, detailing seemingly inexplicable behaviors in captive primates. This wasn't weakness. It was a ghost. A fleeting echo of a suppressed childhood fascination with the unexplained intelligence of animals. As a boy, he had devoured books on ethology, on the subtle language of the natural world, on the tantalizing possibility that animals possessed an innate understanding of environmental shifts invisible to humans. He had spent hours in dusty library corners, poring over old zoological texts and anecdotal reports, seeing patterns of communication and consciousness that no one else seemed to notice. That innocent curiosity, that intuitive understanding of hidden animal languages and radical communication possibilities that predates his formal zoological training, had been systematically dismantled and replaced by the rigorous demands of conventional zoo management and objective scientific observation. Occasionally, while stopping mid-observation of a chimpanzee's repetitive gesture, or staring at a seemingly random pattern of marks on the enclosure wall, his senses picking up on an anomaly no conventional instrument could yet register a peculiar resonance in a chimpanzee's chest, a faint, almost inaudible clicking sound from its throat, a subtle rhythmic shift in its gait, a fleeting, almost visionary look would cross his eyes, as if he could glimpse the invisible pathways of animal thought, the subtle shifts in consciousness that defied conventional understanding. It was quickly masked by his usual diligent expression, the disciplined zookeeper asserting his dominance once more. This subtle tremor, this fleeting look, suggested a buried, intuitive ethological mind, a dormant capacity for profound, perhaps even prophetic insight into animal communication, a secret strength waiting for its true challenge, a battle to redefine humanity's understanding of its place in the animal kingdom. The low hum of Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary, usually a comforting backdrop to Elias Thorne's meticulous work with the animals, began to morph into a subtle, discordant buzz. It was the sound of disruption, a premonition of sweeping change that threatened to shatter his meticulously constructed world of quiet observation and unspoken bonds. The catalyst for this unsettling shift arrived not with a thunderclap of a disastrous event, but with the insidious, almost imperceptible fire of disregard, carried on the impersonal words of a new corporate philosophy. The disturbance came with the arrival of a new, aggressive zoo director, Mark Peterson. Peterson, a man in his late 40s with a sharp, business-oriented mind and an unshakable belief in modernization and streamlining, had risen through the ranks of corporate management, lauded for his aggressive expansion strategies and his unwavering belief in the supremacy of quantifiable metrics. He was the embodiment of the new zoo management, lean, fast, data-driven, and utterly dismissive of anything that didn't provide immediate, visible returns. His philosophy was simple if an animal or a practice didn't contribute directly to visitor numbers, breeding success rates, or public relations. It was a drain on resources. Peterson's arrival at Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary, a traditional institution with a long history of compassionate animal care, was met with a mix of excitement from some who craved modern amenities and deep trepidation from longtime zookeepers like Elias. For Elias, it was a subtle tightening of the air, a sense of impending, unwelcome change. Peterson viewed the sprawling, naturalistic habitats as inefficient, the focus on individual animal well-being as overly sentimental. Elias's meticulous, hand-drawn animal behavior charts, his quiet dedication to understanding nuanced animal communication, and his profound empathy for the animals were seen as useless anachronisms, a significant drain on resources in a digitally driven age. The sweeping changes were publicly announced during a high-profile, sanctuary-wide address, broadcast to every enclosure and office globally. Peterson, standing before a bank of gleaming digital screens displaying soaring visitor projections and sleek new exhibit designs, proclaimed his vision for Havenwood reimagined. His voice, amplified and confident, filled every room. "We are moving Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary into the 21st century," Peterson declared, his arms sweeping wide. "No more outdated practices, no more redundant processes. We will be agile, efficient, and entirely data-driven." He outlined plans for massive investment in high-tech visitor experiences, automated feeding systems, and new, efficient breeding programs. And then came the chilling, inevitable directive: Elias Thorne's mandatory retirement. Elias was formally given his retirement papers, publicly labeled obsolete and overly sentimental, his decades of quiet service dismissed with a terse, impersonal memo. His life's purpose, his connection to the animals he loved, was being severed. For Elias, this wasn't merely a job loss, it was a brutal severing of his connection to his life's purpose and the very animals he had diligently safeguarded. The chimpanzee enclosure, in particular, was his sanctuary, his second home. He had meticulously built its intricate enrichment programs, often by hand, knowing its hidden complexities, its unique social dynamics, and its vital role in preserving cognitive health. He knew the individual personalities of every chimpanzee, the context of every specific vocalization, the nuances of every subtle gesture. The zoo director's dismissive, profit-driven view of animal care, in stark contrast to Elias's deep, almost intuitive understanding of its profound value, stirred a profound sense of outrage and despair within him. He saw their ignorance not just as a corporate misstep, but as a personal attack on animal intelligence itself, a callous disregard for the intricate beauty and delicate balance of interspecies communication. This audacious plan awakened a dormant protective instinct for the old ways and the truths they held. Truths that, if lost, could have devastating consequences for the animals and the sanctuary. Elias's initial reaction was a profound sense of isolation and frustration. He knew the bureaucratic labyrinth of corporate management, the dismissive attitudes towards lower-tier employees, especially a zookeeper who dared to challenge a CEO's vision. His first instinct was to compile an exhaustive, factual report, appealing to logic. to present the undeniable patterns in the hidden connections of animal behavior, hoping the sheer weight of his meticulously documented knowledge would be enough. He meticulously cross-referenced his observations, noting the behavioral value of certain enrichment activities, the cognitive complexity of specific primate interactions, the context of long-forgotten animal anxieties. He spent hours in his small cabin, surrounded by his hand-drawn charts of chimpanzee communication patterns, charting the unusual connections, feeling the tremor in his hand intensify as he saw the invisible lines of subtle distress beginning to connect disparate parts of the seemingly well-managed sanctuary. Yet, the overwhelming skepticism he anticipated, coupled with the profound sense of duty to the animals he knew were vulnerable, sparked a deep, uncomfortable internal struggle. He was a quiet zookeeper, a man of observation and empathy, not a public relations specialist with a string of academic accolades or celebrity status. Who would listen to him? Who would believe an old zookeeper's ramblings when stacked against the polished presentations of a visionary director? He felt a desperate need to be heard, to protect the unsuspecting animals from a threat they couldn't even see. This desperation awakened a dormant, almost primal need to protect, a fierce resolve that transcended his quiet nature. He foresaw the subtle vulnerabilities that would arise from the modernization, the loss of nuanced understanding, the potential for crucial animal behaviors to be permanently overlooked. The point of no return for Elias arrived on his very last day at the zoo. He had spent his final week meticulously reviewing his observations of a particular chimpanzee named Coco. Coco, a magnificent, intelligent alpha female, had been exhibiting a highly unusual, subtle pattern of repetitive gestures and seemingly random strings of vocalizations for years. These weren't mere mimicry. They were deliberate, consistent, and strangely rhythmic. Elias's intuitive ethological understanding told him this was a nascent, unprecedented attempt at complex communication, far more structured than any conventional animal behavior, hinting at a hidden message. He had compiled a detailed, meticulously documented report outlining Coco's unique communication patterns and his theory of her profound intelligence. He submitted it through official channels, routing it through his immediate supervisor, who, with a dismissive sigh, forwarded it up the bureaucratic chain to the director's office. However, the report landed squarely on the desk of Director Mark Peterson. After a cursory glance at the thick, paper-bound report, his brow furrowed with irritation, flatly refused to give it more than a moment's consideration. An old zookeeper's report, Peterson scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension to his executive assistant, about unusual chimpanzee vocalizations and repetitive gestures being a complex communication. Give me a break. These old-timers are resisting change. They're glorified animal feeders, not primatologists. This is just alarmist nonsense, probably from someone trying to cling to their outdated job and a sentimental attachment to an animal. He publicly dismissed the warning out of hand, perhaps with a cutting remark about old zookeepers talking to animals, or not understanding the complexities of modern zoo management. This outright dismissal, this brutal invalidation of Elias's unique insight, mocked his professionalism and his profound understanding of animal cognition. The dismissal solidified Elias's resolve. He knew Coco was trying to tell him something vital, something urgent. He knew the sanctuary was now vulnerable, poised to overlook a truth he alone had perceived. He couldn't stand by. He would not. The fire of disregard had turned into a roaring threat, and Elias, the quiet zookeeper, was now its lone, unheeded sentinel. His path was clear now, leading him out of the shadows of his disciplined routine and into a desperate, silent battle. On his very last day, as he was cleaning Coco's enclosure for the final time, Coco exhibited a new, highly specific, frantic sequence of gestures. She pointed repeatedly towards a specific, remote section of the Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary's natural habitat, a rarely patrolled, overgrown area known for its hidden trails, a place where dangerous, illegal activity could easily go unnoticed. This new behavior was dismissed by a younger, cynical zookeeper as Coco's separation anxiety, her final agitated breakdown before Elias's departure. Elias, however, intuitively recognized a hidden, urgent pattern in Coco's new signals, a pattern that defied conventional animal distress, hinting at a structured geographical message, a desperate plea for help. This outright dismissal of Coco's distress, this brutal invalidation of his unique insight, marked the point of no return for Elias's quiet, unacknowledged existence. He knew Coco was communicating a vital truth, and he cannot stand by. He began to secretly decipher Coco's message, driven by a terrifying sense of urgency and foreboding, knowing his own traumatic past. The sprawling Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary, usually a haven of meticulously managed habitats, now buzzed with a nervous tension that only Elias Thorne seemed to truly perceive. Director Mark Peterson's sweeping Havenwood Reimagined modernization plans thundered forward, his focus absolute on visitor numbers and breeding success rates. But beneath the polished veneer of progress, a subtle yet escalating internal crisis began to fester. Minor, unexplained disturbances began to occur in the sanctuary's vast, wild animal habitats. Tracking collars, seemingly secure, mysteriously disappeared from smaller animals, their signals vanishing without a trace. Faint, unusual scent trails, imperceptible to standard human patrols, permeated remote sections of the natural habitat, and strange, rhythmic calls from nocturnal birds, unlike any documented species, echoed through the dense forest at night. The zoo security teams and park rangers, baffled, attributed these vague anomalies to natural wildlife behavior, to animal migrations, or to minor equipment malfunctions, completely unaware of the insidious truth. Elias's last day at the zoo loomed like a personal storm cloud, amplifying his quiet desperation. The news of his forced retirement and the impending new management for the chimpanzee enclosure focused on modernizing Coco's habitat with sleek, impersonal technology, spread quietly among the staff. This meant less direct human contact, less nuanced observation, a critical flaw in Peterson's vision, to Elias's mind. Elias knew that Coco, the magnificent alpha female chimpanzee, was frantically trying to communicate a vital truth, a message hidden in her unique patterns. He was running out of time, driven by a quiet desperation and a fierce, ethical need to protect the animals he considered his family, and to honor Coco's desperate plea. Elias knew he had to break through. His meticulously documented report, detailing Coco's unique communication patterns and his theory of her profound intelligence, had been dismissed. Now, he prepared to confront the very system that dismissed his quiet expertise. His chosen arena for this desperate attempt to communicate was the exclusive public farewell ceremony for Elias, held in the main visitor center. It was a mandatory event for all staff, attended by local dignitaries, zoo patrons, and, inevitably, Director Mark Peterson, who would use it as another opportunity to champion his vision of modern zoo management. The visitor center hall buzzed with the polite chatter of well-wishers and the subtle hum of newly installed interactive exhibits. Gleaming digital displays and loud, enthusiastic sales pitches for Havenwood Reimagined filled the air. Elias, dressed in his worn but meticulously clean, best uniform, felt like a quiet anachronism amidst the vibrant, high-tech crowd. He waited for a lull in the ceremony, a moment when Director Peterson, charismatic and impeccably dressed, stood alone near his team's towering display of new exhibit designs, beaming at his accomplishments. Elias, clutching a small, discreetly rolled-up, hand-drawn chart of Coco's unique gestures and vocalizations, stepped forward. "Director Peterson," Elias began, his voice calm, precise, but initially a little raw with nerves. "I am Elias Thorne. As you know, today is my last day after decades of service to Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary. In my years, I have observed many things. And for the past few weeks, our chimpanzee, Coco, has been exhibiting highly unusual communication patterns." He then got straight to the point, his gaze unwavering. "My observations indicate a nascent threat to our animals, particularly those in the natural habitat zones. I believe Coco is attempting to communicate where poachers' traps are located. He attempted to articulate his findings in precise ethological terms. Speaking of Coco's unique gestural grammar, the correlation of her vocalizations with specific habitat areas, and the potential for embedded geographical information within her seemingly random strings of barks and grunts. He referenced terms like non-verbal lexicon, spatial mapping through proxy, and distress signal variations, his language accurate but perhaps too technical, too abstract. For an administrator obsessed with visitor numbers and streamlined operations, Director Peterson, initially dismissive, quickly interrupted. He leaned closer, his voice dripping with polite condescension. A practiced smile plastered on his face. "My dear Mr. Thorne, isn't it? Yes. Your dedication to Coco is legendary, truly. But with all due respect, Director Peterson, Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary deals with modern zoo management, with rigorous security protocols, with cutting-edge animal husbandry. Your gestural grammar and spatial mapping through proxy are simply irrelevant to our business model. This isn't a science lecture. This is a farewell ceremony. We rely on verifiable data, sir. On what our perimeter sensors tell us, not on old wives' tales about talking chimpanzees." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that reverberated through the bustling hall. "And a report about poachers' traps from a man who claims to be having imaginary conversations with an ape. I suppose some folks just prefer their nostalgia to progress. Perhaps Mr. Thorne is just a bit of an overly sentimental eccentric who sees too much in an animal's anxious whimpers." A wave of polite, amused laughter and murmurs of agreement rippled through the curious onlookers. He painted Elias as an eccentric, overly sentimental zookeeper, using dismissive language to rally public support for his new vision and silence any dissent, firmly establishing himself as the misguided antagonist, his pride and belief in conventional animal psychology blinding him to revolutionary, fundamental truths. Alara felt the sting of the mockery, the cold dismissal of his life's dedication, but he held his ground. "Director," he insisted, his voice gaining a quiet urgency, "animal wisdom, when truly understood, often precedes human technology. Coco is not just agitated. She is warning us. I have meticulously documented a minute, almost invisible shift in a specific animal migration path within the natural habitat, correlating precisely with Coco's distress signals. My observations show a unique, unlisted distress call emanating from a remote tracking device on a smaller, typically solitary antelope. A call that matches a sequence in Coco's own vocalizations. These seemingly disparate facts, when viewed through my unseen patterns of animal behavior, indicate a nascent poaching operation. A silent, insidious threat to our animals. This isn't coincidence or paranoia. Director, this is an early warning." Peterson merely scoffed again, waving his hand dismissively. "Coincidence, Mr. Thorne, or sensor malfunction. Our security teams, our sophisticated drone surveillance, our vast network of tracking devices, all indicate a secure and protected sanctuary. We rely on their reports, scientifically conducted, not on the observations of a man who talks to chimpanzees. Your alarmism is unscientific and, frankly, irresponsible. Havenwood Reimagined proceeds as planned." He dismissed this as coincidence or sensor malfunction, reaffirming his faith in his established top-down systems. However, not everyone at the ceremony shared Peterson's dismissive view. Dr. Anya Sharma, a sharp, empathetic primatologist and lead animal behaviorist at the Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary, stood near the stage, observing the interaction. Anya was a rising star in her field, known for her innovative research into animal cognition and her embrace of new, non-invasive observation techniques. Yet, she also possessed a quiet but profound respect for local knowledge and the wisdom of seasoned zookeepers. She had heard whispers about Elias Thorne, the animal whisperer, but had dismissed them as charming legend. But now, hearing Elias speak with such quiet intensity, seeing the detailed data in his report, and feeling the almost prophetic urgency in his voice, A prickle of unease ran down her spine. Anya had indeed been tracking some inexplicable minor shifts in animal migration patterns in the natural habitat, attributing them to seasonal changes. But Elias's correlation of those shifts with Coco's specific behaviors, his mention of unique distress calls, struck a chilling chord. She noticed the subtle, almost desperate sincerity in Elias's eyes, and the unique, complex logic in his abstract observations, sensing a tangible link between the animal behaviors and a truly unprecedented, potentially catastrophic, poaching operation. Dr. Sharma, recognizing a kindred spirit in the pursuit of unseen truths, became Elias's helper, her presence a quiet counterpoint to Peterson's dismissive arrogance. In a desperate attempt to be heard, to offer something tangible, something that might penetrate Peterson's analytical armor, Elias reached for his quietly rolled chart. He unrolled it to reveal his hand-drawn, meticulous charts. He pointed to a specific, almost invisible feature, a long-forgotten, unlisted animal trail winding through a notoriously dense section of the natural habitat. A trail that his own research and intuitive understanding told him was a crucial poacher's path. "This trail," Elias explained, his finger tracing a faint line on the map. "It's not on your digital maps. It's an old elephant path. Coco has been tracing its exact outline. Director, over and over in her sand drawings. It leads to the Whispering Glade, a place where the old-timers say the animals always feel unsafe. It's the slow path to the heart of the habitat, but it's where the traps are. She's telling us where they are." Peterson dismissed this as an irrelevant detail or Elias's paranoia. However, Dr. Sharma, seeing the quiet conviction in Elias's eyes and the almost prophetic urgency in his voice, felt a growing unease. She saw the subtle, intuitive wisdom beneath Elias's gruff exterior, sensing a tangible link between the environmental patterns and a truly unprecedented, potentially catastrophic, poaching disaster. The farewell ceremony concluded with a resounding endorsement of Director Peterson's Havenwood Reimagined plan, solidifying his dominance in modern zoo management. The roar of applause for Peterson was deafening, drowning out the few dissenting murmurs. Elias left the visitor center feeling utterly defeated, the weight of his unheeded warning pressing down on him like a physical burden. The modern zoo, he knew, was now blind to a truth he alone had perceived, its future built on a flawed foundation. He was a voice crying in the wilderness, unheard amidst the clamor for progress. But Coco, his quiet oracle, and the sanctuary, held secrets still, vital truths that might yet turn the tide, if only he could reveal them before it was too late. The unseen patterns he had charted, delivered by his beloved chimpanzee, were now a ticking time bomb, and the clock was counting down to a crisis no one else had the foresight to see. The tranquil air of Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary, usually a symphony of rustling leaves and contented animal sounds, had twisted into a discordant hum, a chilling undercurrent of unease that only Elias Thorne seemed to fully grasp. Director Mark Peterson, utterly deaf to Elias's increasingly frantic warnings and oblivious to Dr. Anya Sharma's quiet apprehensions, pushed ahead with his ambitious Havenwood Reimagined plans. His focus remained absolute visitor numbers, breeding success rates, and the polished image of a modern, efficient zoo. The subtle anomalies Elias detected were mere background noise in Peterson's relentless pursuit of quantifiable progress. The subtle signs of poaching, initially localized to vague animal distress in Coco's enclosure, began to accelerate silently but rapidly within the sanctuary's vast, wild animal habitats. What began as unexplained disappearances of smaller, less prominent animals, a rare species of forest antelope, a few exotic birds from the distant aviaries, now escalated to larger, more critically endangered species. Faint, unidentifiable sounds of illegal traps being set, the almost imperceptible click of snares, or the distant thud of a tranquilizer dart, permeated remote sections of the natural habitat, undetectable by standard human patrols or conventional perimeter sensors. Zoo security and park rangers, baffled, attributed these vague anomalies to natural predation, animal migrations, or isolated incidents of local mischief. Their sophisticated digital tracking systems, built on historical data of known animal movements, failed to recognize the unique signature of an organized, escalating poaching operation, a phantom menace that defied their algorithms. The arena was the sprawling Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary itself, a vast, seemingly pristine wilderness, where bureaucratic arrogance now clashed directly with the insidious power of an unseen, intelligent, and rapidly escalating criminal enterprise. Elias, now formally retired, watched the unfolding crisis from the confines of his small cabin. His warnings ignored, his reputation as an eccentric zookeeper cemented by Peterson's public dismissals. He spent his days in a self-imposed exile, frantically tracking the escalating signs of poaching. He cross-referenced local news reports about unusual animal movements near the sanctuary perimeter, with his meticulous notes on Coco's escalating agitation and her specific patterned behaviors. He contacted former colleagues, independent animal behaviorists, and even sympathetic local rangers, sending terse, coded emails detailing the escalating threat and the precise nature of the poaching methods he suspected, but his warnings were consistently dismissed, categorized as the bitter ramblings of a disgruntled, retired employee, ignored by a sanctuary basking in the glow of its modernization. His old academic contacts, wary of Peterson's influence and the shadow it cast over unscientific theories, discreetly avoided his calls. He found himself working almost entirely alone from his cabin, fueled by strong black coffee and an unyielding conviction. He frantically tried to find an external, undeniable method to prove his claims, relying solely on his unique, intuitive understanding of animal behavior, the subtle rhythms of the sanctuary, and the unspoken language of the wild. He became a lonely visionary, his unique brilliance misunderstood and actively suppressed by those who adhered to conventional, technology-driven security. Meanwhile, back in the gleaming main offices of Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary, Director Mark Peterson remained blissfully ignorant of the true depth of the gathering storm. He dismissed the escalating animal disappearances as natural attrition or minor fluctuations in population dynamics, easily absorbed by the sanctuary's vast reserves. He attributed the subtle security incidents to aging infrastructure or disgruntled former employees, easily managed by his internal security teams. He relied on his sophisticated motion sensors, drone surveillance, and traditional patrol routes, convinced of their infallibility. He continued to view Elias's alarmist theories as irrelevant, the ramblings of a man clinging to outdated methods. He reveled in the growing success of Havenwood Reimagined, its visitor numbers soaring, its public image polished, utterly unaware of the profound, sanctuary-shaking secrets Elias was trying to uncover. He made condescending remarks about Elias's obsession with one chimpanzee, or his lack of understanding of how a modern facility operates. The dramatic irony intensified with every passing hour. The reader knew the true devastating scale of the poaching operation and the imminent threat to the sanctuary's most treasured species, while Director Peterson remained blissfully ignorant, blinded by his own corporate hubris and narrow definition of security. He was a general confidently commanding his forces, utterly unaware that the key to his fortress had been subtly whispered by a chimpanzee and understood only by the man he had dismissed. The gauntlet. The race for the trap locations began when Elias realized the full gravity of Coco's message. The chimpanzee's seemingly random strings of vocalizations and repetitive gestures, Elias deduced, were not just a code for a particular poacher, but a complex, sophisticated geographical key embedded within a pattern of communication. Coco's agitation, Elias now understood, was linked to specific times and locations within the natural habitat, times when the poachers were active. His research indicated that the poachers were utilizing a highly advanced, non-metal trapping system, undetectable by the sanctuary's conventional metal detectors or ground sensors. The arena was his quiet cabin, a symbolic battleground where intuitive genius clashed against the limitations of modern technology and the vast, uncaring wilderness. He delved into his own vast mental archive of Coco's specific gestures, vocalizations, and the precise, minute details of her daily routines, the way she would mimic certain bird calls, the direction she would point during specific acts of distress, the patterns she would draw in the sand of her enclosure. He spent countless hours cross-referencing these observations with his hand-drawn maps of the sanctuary's hidden trails, old park ranger reports detailing subtle environmental shifts, and local indigenous folklore about unusual animal migrations. He was searching for a definitive, undeniable spatial correlation or a clear systemic link between Coco's distress and the poacher's movements. A smoking gun that conventional surveillance had completely missed. He was searching for the exact locations of the poacher's traps, a secret hidden in plain sight, communicated across an interspecies divide by the most unlikely of messengers. Time pressure. The pressure mounted with terrifying intensity. The poaching operation began to rapidly accelerate. News reports, initially vague, now confirmed unusual animal deaths or environmental disturbances within the Havenwood Sanctuary, sparking widespread public outrage and concern from national conservation groups. Critically endangered species, a rare clouded leopard, a newly born gorilla were disappearing. The sanctuary was on the brink of official lockdown. But security officials, baffled by the lack of conventional evidence, still lacked a clear understanding of the poacher's methods or precise locations. The ticking clock, a literal countdown to a devastating loss of irreplaceable wildlife, added immense crushing pressure to Elias's frantic, solitary quest. Each passing hour, each new red alert on the news channels about another missing animal, was a brutal reminder of the lives hanging by a thread. Elias was physically and mentally exhausted, battling the complexities of animal communication, the vastness of human ignorance, and the relentless pressure. But his innate connection to Coco, his desperate need to save the animals, kept him going. He knew he was close, that the solution lay just beyond the reach of conventional understanding, hidden in the very random behaviors others dismissed as noise. The fate of Havenwood's most precious inhabitants, and his own vindication, rested entirely on his ability to unlock the hidden language of the wild. The air in Elias Thorne's small, cluttered cabin was thick with the scent of pine and the palpable tension of a desperate final push. Days had bled into nights, marked only by the flickering glow of his headlamp and the gnawing ache of exhaustion. The Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary, a vast expanse he knew intimately, was under siege by unseen poachers. And the animals, his quiet family, were disappearing at an alarming rate. His precise, hand-drawn maps of Coco's behavior patterns, meticulously charted for years, were failing him in this final, desperate race against time. His hands, perpetually stained with ink and the subtle residue of animal tracking, trembled constantly now. The mysterious tremor, a profound, relentless vibration that ran from his fingertips to his very soul. His mind, usually a precise instrument of ethological observation, was a blur of animal vocalizations, frantic gestures, and intuitive flashes, desperately seeking the elusive key to the poacher's hidden trap locations. The digital clock on his battered laptop, its red digits a cold, mocking countdown, ticked relentlessly towards a devastating loss of irreplaceable wildlife. He had pushed himself beyond the limits of human endurance, driven by a conviction so fierce it bordered on obsession. He had meticulously analyzed every unique vocalization, every subtle change in Coco's daily routine, every frantic scratching at the enclosure wall, correlating them with the reports of missing animals and the vague anomalies picked up by the sanctuary's failing security systems. Every logical, ethological pathway seemed utterly exhausted. Every possibility explored and found wanting. Despair, a cold, insidious tendril, began to coil around his heart. The air felt heavy, suffocating, threatening to crush the last vestiges of hope for the innocent animals, for the sanctuary, and for his own profound vindication. Just as despair threatened to consume him, when every logical scientific pathway seemed exhausted, and Coco's complex patterns seemed utterly random, devoid of meaning beyond frantic distress. Elias pushed back from his desk, a raw cry of frustration escaping his lips. His gaze, weary and bloodshot, fell upon a small, dusty box tucked away in a corner of his cluttered cabin. It contained relics from his childhood forgotten nature journals, crude sketches of animal tracks, and a battered, complex, interlocking animal puzzle, its wooden pieces warped with age. Beside it, an old, broken, unique compass from his past, its needle perpetually stuck, a relic from his forgotten childhood fascination with tracking hidden pathways in the wilderness. The tremor in his hand intensified, almost guiding him. He reached for the puzzle, his fingers brushing against its worn wood. As he held it, a profound intuitive flash, a suppressed memory of his childhood wonder at hidden animal behaviors and unseen ecological connections, flooded his mind. He remembered the feeling of that complex puzzle clicking into place, the sudden clarity of understanding a system that defied initial logic. He remembered staring at the broken compass, wondering about the unseen force that guided animals through the wilderness, a force beyond simple navigation. He saw the solution not in a new scientific model, but in a holistic, almost mystical recognition of an unseen principle of animal communication. The key wasn't about complex algorithms or deciphering a human-like language. It was about a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in Coco's spatial reasoning, a specific, counterintuitive behavioral sequence that unlocked the chimpanzee's messages, a method that defied conventional ethology. He didn't calculate, he felt it, interpreting Coco's frantic actions as a vast, living, topographical map. He scrambled back to his main work table, his hands, now steady with a newfound purpose, moving with an uncanny speed and precision that defied his exhaustion. He grabbed his largest, most detailed map of the Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary. He began to overlay Coco's observed behaviors onto the map. Her specific scratching patterns on the enclosure wall became coordinates. The direction of her agitated vocalizations indicated a vector. The rhythm of her frantic pacing correlated with distances. He then aligned these patterns with the subtle environmental cues he had meticulously documented over the years. The ones he now knew were signs of poacher activity. He made a single, counterintuitive adjustment to his mental decryption model, interpreting Coco's random numbers, not as a sequence, but as a series of spatial markers and directional indicators based on the topography of the chimpanzee enclosure itself, a system Coco had devised to communicate locations. The fragmented patterns on his map suddenly regularized. The erratic bursts of Coco's distress signals smoothed into a pure, clean, impossibly precise resonance. The points he had been charting, which had been flickering wildly, settled, then surged, displaying a minute, yet undeniable surge of poacher activity in specific, remote sections of the sanctuary. The glowing dots on his map intensified, no longer random points of distress, but a chillingly precise blueprint of the poachers' hidden trap locations, their entry and exit points, and even their next target. It was the impossible. It was the unexpected. It was the ultimate proof. The unspoken map of survival had been revealed. Triumph surged through Elias, a raw, primal scream of vindication that he barely suppressed. He immediately copied the definitive map onto a digital file, clutching the small flash drive like a sacred relic, disheveled, fueled by pure adrenaline. He raced from his cabin, ignoring the calls of his concerned neighbors, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten, replaced by a surge of desperate urgency. He ran through the dark, silent trails of the sanctuary, the small flash drive clutched tightly in his trembling hand, a fragile beacon of hope against the encroaching shadow of the poachers. He burst through the main gates of the Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary's administrative building, interrupting an emergency security briefing where Director Mark Peterson was announcing an imminent lockdown and downplaying the severity of the animal disappearances. Peterson's face, projected onto large screens in the sterile briefing room, was grim but composed, trying to project an image of control even as the sanctuary teetered on the brink of ecological disaster. "Stop!" Elias Thorne bellowed, his voice raw and hoarse, cutting through the muffled murmurs and Peterson's practiced rhetoric like a knife. He stumbled forward, his appearance wild and desperate, his eyes burning with an almost manic intensity. His clothes were torn, his face streaked with dirt and sweat, and his presence was a stark, disruptive contrast to the crisp uniforms and gleaming digital displays. Director Peterson, initially furious at the blatant interruption, spun around, his face a mask of irritation that quickly morphed into disbelief, then utter shock, as he registered Elias's disheveled state and the small flash drive clutched in his hand. "Thorne, what in God's name is this? You're disrupting a critical security briefing. Get him out of here." Peterson bellowed, his voice laced with the remnants of his arrogance, now tinged with fear. Elias ignored him. He pushed through the bewildered security guards, his gaze fixed on Director Peterson, and finally on Dr. Anya Sharma, the chief animal behaviorist who sat beside Peterson, her brow furrowed with deep concern. He slammed the flash drive onto the central table, its small metallic gleam a stark presence amidst the polished wood and flashing digital screens. "Director Peterson, Dr. Sharma. You cannot lock down the sanctuary without understanding. You cannot. The animals, they're being poached. Coco, she told me. The poachers' traps. I have the locations. The map. It's here." His words tumbled out, raw with urgency and emotion, painting a vivid picture of his impossible discovery. It's a pattern in Coco's gestures, a spatial code linked to their missing tracking collars. They're using silent, non-metal snares. And their next target, it's the rare white rhinos in Sector Gamma 4. They're moving in now. Peterson stared at the flash drive, then at Elias, his face a mask of disbelief. He snatched up the drive, his fingers trembling as he inserted it into a nearby terminal. He pulled up Elias's data, his fingers tracing the complex diagrams, the deciphered sequence. He was a master of modern zoo management and security, and even at first glance, he recognized the profound implications. He initially tried to dismiss it, to find a logical flaw, to claim it was a hoax, a desperate fabrication from a disgruntled, retired zookeeper. His brow furrowed, his lips moved silently as he fought to reconcile the tangible evidence with the absurd source. But the data was watertight, irrefutable. The deciphered locations aligned perfectly with subtle, previously dismissed anomalies in their own satellite imagery, and the patterns matched the missing animal reports. It was a devastating blow to his entire strategy. The turnaround. A collective gasp. Then a ripple of stunned silence swept through the room as the security team and park rangers began to understand the magnitude of Elias's discovery. Dr. Anya Sharma, who had been alerted by Elias's last desperate call from his cabin, rushed forward, her face pale, confirming Elias's findings with the ethological rigor Peterson now desperately needed. "He's right. Mark." Sharma gasped, holding up her own tablet, its screen mirroring Elias's data. "The patterns, they match Coco's distress. It was a map. The poachers, they're real, and they're targeting the rhinos now." Peterson's arrogance shattered, replaced by stunned awe and profound shame. He stared at the flash drive, then at the stunned faces of his security team, his meticulously constructed world of efficient zoo management collapsing around him. He was forced to acknowledge that his narrow focus on quantifiable metrics and conventional security had utterly blinded him to this profound truth. The eccentric zookeeper, the ramblings he had scoffed at, had just saved the sanctuary from an unimaginable catastrophe. Elias was publicly vindicated, not by his professional status, but by his unparalleled foresight and unwavering dedication to animal welfare. The lockdown was immediately redirected. Rescue teams deployed. Reactions of the zoo staff and public order. Everyone. Anya Sharma's voice cut through the growing murmur of the room, sharp and authoritative. The poachers are real, Director Peterson. We need to implement Mr. Thorne's recommendations. Immediately deploy all units to Sector Gamma 4. Get the anti-poaching team to the Whispering Glade. Now. She then turned to the security team, her voice ringing with newfound clarity. We have the map, we have the key, and we will stop them. The Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary staff and park rangers, initially skeptical and dismissive of Elias, erupted in a mix of stunned silence, then overwhelming relief, then joyous shouts of triumph and amazement. They crowded around the table, marveling at the complex data, the clear solution Elias had provided. Mark Peterson, his face pale but profoundly changed, looked at Elias with dawning respect. The public, who had been following the escalating news of animal disappearances with mounting terror, transitioned from despair to amazement, then to joyous cheers for the animal's miraculous rescue, and a dawning, humbling understanding of the cat lady's critical role. The overlooked, the dismissed, had become the savior. The chimpanzee's message had become the unspoken map of survival, the key to protecting the wild. The furious alarms that had blared through Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary had finally fallen silent, replaced by a profound, almost reverent hush that settled over the entire sprawling complex. The poaching crisis, a terrifying specter of ecological ruin, was swiftly and decisively dismantled. Thanks to Elias Thorne's crucial decipherment of Coco's message and his lightning-fast thinking, countless animals, including the critically endangered white rhinos, were saved from the poachers' insidious traps, transforming Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary into a global conservation success story. The incident became a powerful national and international sensation, a gripping narrative of overlooked wisdom and prophetic foresight that captured the public imagination. Elias's story, once confined to the whispers of a few compassionate zookeepers, now resonated with millions, transforming the public narrative of the cat lady into a testament to profound interspecies communication and quiet heroism. Director Mark Peterson, the architect of Havenwood's reimagined vision, whose arrogance and rigid adherence to conventional zoo management had almost led to a devastating loss of irreplaceable wildlife, found himself a profoundly humbled figure. The events of the past few days, the terrifying proximity to ecological collapse, the undeniable failure of his sophisticated digital security systems, and the miraculous intervention of Elias's unique, uncredited brilliance had shattered Peterson's rigid belief system. The very foundations of his pragmatic, profit-driven worldview, where animal welfare was solely measured by statistics and visitor numbers, had been irrevocably overturned by the living, breathing, undeniable truth delivered by a chimpanzee and understood by a man he had so casually dismissed. Days after the poaching ring was apprehended and the rescued animals secured, Peterson called a public apology. It was held not in the sterile briefing room, but in the sanctuary's main public viewing area, specifically the chimpanzee enclosure. Coco, calm and watchful, sat high on her climbing structure, observing the scene. Peterson's impeccably tailored suit seemed to hang loosely on his frame, his usual polished confidence replaced by a visible humility and profound regret that few had ever witnessed. He stood before a sea of grateful zookeepers, bewildered conservationists, and eager journalists, their gazes fixed on him. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, and the public," Mark Peterson began, his voice clear but tinged with a raw honesty that resonated deeply. "Today, I stand before you not solely as the director of Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary, but as a man who made a profound, devastating error. For too long, my focus was solely on visible progress, on maximizing visitor numbers, on what could be built and quantified in quarterly reports. I believed that modern technology and conventional animal husbandry held all the answers to wildlife management." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled crowd, then settling on Elias Thorne, who stood quietly to the side, his presence unassuming yet commanding, surrounded by his beloved, watchful cats. Dr. Anya Sharma, the brilliant chief primatologist who had championed Elias, stood beside him, a pillar of quiet support. "I will be frank," Peterson continued, his voice gaining a newfound, almost painful sincerity. "When Mr. Elias Thorne, a dedicated zookeeper, first presented his warnings about unusual chimpanzee behavior and his theory of a poaching threat, I dismissed it. I mocked his dedication. I called him eccentric. I insisted on empirical data, on what could be seen, touched, measured by conventional sensors and cameras. I believed that animal intelligence was fully understood, and that any deviation from the norm was merely agitation or separation anxiety." A ripple of murmurs, then gasps, went through the assembled press and sanctuary personnel. This was an unprecedented public admission from a director of Peterson's stature, a searingly honest confession of his intellectual pride and egregious misjudgment. He laid bare his flawed reasoning, his blind faith in rigid conventions alone, and the dangerous consequences of his closed-mindedness. This was a profound public penance. Mark Peterson, the archetypal Type B, misguided adversary, had genuinely repented. "I was wrong," Peterson declared, his voice firm, imbued with a raw emotion that resonated deeply. Profoundly, tragically wrong. My rigid focus on visitor numbers and traditional zoo management utterly blinded me to a truth that existed beyond the realm of my conventional understanding. It was Mr. Thorne's unparalleled intuitive understanding of animal behavior, his decades of patient observation, and Coco's remarkable communication that ultimately revealed the true nature of the poaching threat and the precise location of the traps. His gaze found Elias's, his eyes shining with profound gratitude and a dawning, terrifying respect. Elias Thorne has not just saved countless animals, he has taught me, and indeed, every leader in this sanctuary, a vital lesson that true conservation, true understanding of the wild, comes from valuing every perspective, no matter how unconventional or humble its origin. It comes from listening to the unspoken languages of the animal kingdom. Elias, no longer a dismissed zookeeper, found himself navigating a world transformed by his own hands. The public clamored to hear his story, now fascinated by the unseen guardians of Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary. The media, which had initially reported on his forced retirement, now championed Elias as a bioresponse visionary, a symbol of wisdom scorned and then gloriously redeemed. Director Peterson, true to his word and with Dr. Anya Sharma's strong advocacy, moved swiftly to ensure Elias's unique talents were formally recognized within the sanctuary's structure. Anya, who had been Elias's unwavering scientific advocate and had risked her own career by quietly supporting him, approached him with a new proposal. "Elias," Anya began, her voice earnest, "your abilities are extraordinary. Your understanding of animal behavior as an early warning system, your unique way of deciphering interspecies communication, it's invaluable. We need you. Desperately. Director Peterson and I, with the full backing of the board, want to offer you an unprecedented opportunity to lead a newly established primate cognition and conservation unit within the Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary." Elias listened, his gaze fixed on Anya's earnest face, sensing the profound sincerity in her offer. This was more than a job. It was a profound purpose, a chance to truly integrate his lifetime of unique knowledge and intuitive insight into the very fabric of wildlife conservation. His new role was significant, allowing him to pursue his passion for primatology and animal welfare on a broader scale, to advocate for a more holistic approach to conservation, and to mentor others in his unique philosophy. His mandate would be to integrate animal communication research with anti-poaching strategies, develop proactive wildlife monitoring protocols based on animal behavior, and foster a new generation of talent in unconventional ethology. The subtle tremor in his dominant hand, which had once been a persistent reminder of past frustration and unheeded warnings, was now entirely gone, replaced by a quiet, steady confidence, a tangible reflection of his inner peace and renewed purpose. Later, in a quieter moment in the newly designed Primate Cognition and Conservation Unit lab, a state-of-the-art facility that emphasized empathy and interspecies understanding. Elias and Director Peterson, joined by Dr. Anya Sharma, reflected on the profound lessons learned. The lab, a vibrant hub of intense, collaborative research, felt different now. No longer driven by rigid protocols, but by a shared, boundless vision for safeguarding wildlife. "It's ironic, isn't it?" Peterson mused, a self-deprecating smile on his face. "I retired the very man who understood animal behavior better than any of us. I thought I knew everything about zoo management, because I knew the business plans and the visitor statistics. You taught me, Elias, that true conservation is built on understanding, not just control. It's about listening to the wild, not just managing it." Dr. Sharma, who had been a crucial bridge between their two worlds, nodded, her gaze warm. "Elias understands that animal intelligence is far more complex than any human test can show. He sees the hidden languages. He dared to listen where others wouldn't. Mark, and he saved countless lives." They spoke of the dangers of intellectual arrogance in wildlife management, the limits of purely human-centric solutions, and the enduring importance of respecting animal intelligence and the profound, often unseen, bonds between species. Elias emphasized that true conservation was not measured solely in population numbers, but in the vibrant, interconnected harmony of all life forms within a thriving ecosystem. The quiet calm that settled over Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary, and indeed, subtly throughout the global conservation community, was not just the absence of conflict, it was the profound peace of a purpose realigned, a legacy defined, and a future built on the infinite promise of human-animal connection and profound wisdom. The resounding harmony of wild and wisdom had truly begun to echo across the world. 5 years had woven their intricate tapestry across Havenwood, transforming the small suburban town from a place of conventionality into a globally recognized beacon of urban resilience and integrated wisdom. The terrifying specter of the massive electrical fire, once a chilling threat, had long vanished, replaced by the vibrant hum of a community thriving with newfound awareness and foresight. Dr. Ilara Vance, once a quiet, unassuming woman mocked as the Cat Lady, now stood as a towering figure of influence. She was a nationally recognized expert in bioresponse and urban resilience, a respected thought leader, and the esteemed head of Havenwood's thriving Urban Wildlife and Disaster Preparedness Unit, UWDPU. Her unconventional methods, rooted in a deep, intuitive understanding of animal psychology, had become industry standard, protecting cities worldwide from unforeseen disasters. Her work had inspired a new generation of scientists, animal behaviorists, and emergency responders. Her approach, combining rigorous scientific analysis with a profound, almost intuitive understanding of animal behavior and intelligence, had become a model for global wildlife protection. She had found true fulfillment, balancing her innate brilliance with an unwavering commitment to animal welfare and biodiversity. Ilara's primary focus now extended far beyond the confines of her rebuilt home. She had established the UWDPU as a groundbreaking division within the city's emergency management department, a hub of advanced research and proactive disaster planning. Her main office, a beautifully designed, spacious outdoor training yard within the unit's new headquarters, overlooked a vibrant, restored community green space. Her desk, a custom-built ergonomic console, often held not just digital readouts, but small, intricate models of urban ecosystems, her finger tracing the lines of invisible energy flows. She lectured frequently at top universities, emergency management conferences, and even local community centers, not on traditional disaster response, but on the philosophy of animal sentinels, the importance of valuing every form of environmental expertise, and the profound wisdom embedded in the subtle, often overlooked behaviors of urban wildlife. Beyond his vital responsibilities at the UWDPU, Ilara dedicated a significant portion of her influence and growing resources to paying it forward. She had established prestigious, fully funded scholarship programs for young scientists and animal behaviorists from diverse, often overlooked backgrounds. The program focused not just on academic excellence, but on fostering interdisciplinary thinking and practical, on-the-ground environmental observation skills. She understood that the best insights into environmental shifts often emerged from those who had an intuitive, lived connection to the complexities of the human body. She created a global network of animal sentinel programs, training rescued animals, from urban stray cats to rehabilitated birds, to detect subtle environmental changes, acting as living, breathing early warning systems for natural disasters or hidden hazards. She often visited communities, inspiring them with her story, emphasizing the importance of respecting all forms of life and the wisdom that nature quietly offered. If only humans would listen. Mayor Mark Peterson, having found humility in the crucible of disaster, and Chief Firefighter Anya Sharma, her unwavering champion, frequently supported these initiatives. Peterson, now focused on sustainable urban development and community resilience, often joined Ilara for public appearances, sharing his own story of narrow-mindedness and ultimate enlightenment. Chief Sharma, now a leading voice in integrated emergency response, collaborated closely with the UWDPU. Her fire crews trained to look beyond technology, to listen for the subtle signals Elias taught them to recognize. Their combined efforts had transformed Havenwood into a model for other communities, balancing prosperity with robust disaster preparedness and a deep commitment to valuing all forms of wisdom, human and animal. The initial villain, a corrupt building contractor who had installed faulty, substandard wiring in the neighborhood years ago, had faced severe legal consequences and significant public censure, his actions exposed by the very disaster Ilara's cats had predicted. Justice, in all its forms, had found its way. The story culminates with Ilara, a truly revered guardian of urban safety, sitting on the porch of her beautifully rebuilt home. Now a model for eco-friendly resilience, its new, smart electrical grid humming safely beneath its solar-paneled roof. She was surrounded by her beloved cats, a contented swirl of purrs and soft fur. They purred contentedly, their eyes gleaming in the sunlight, their tails twitching with easy contentment, no longer agitated. She holds a small, intricately carved wooden figurine of a cat, its eyes closed in serene wisdom. Her finger traces a line on a hand-drawn map of the revitalized neighborhood, now connected to a complex, pulsating holographic projection of real-time environmental data, its subtle rhythms clear and comprehensible, all monitored by her animal sentinels. The tremor is entirely gone. She looks towards the horizon, a faint, contented smile on her face. The weight of a neighborhood saved, a quiet, powerful testament to a life lived with unwavering dedication and extraordinary purpose. The cat lady had become the purring heart of the city, its unseen protector. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.